in 30 seconds. Before that, I would like to tell you that we will conduct this in English, and you can ask me the words that you don't understand or the concepts that you don't understand, but we're going to watch the videos, etc., in English, and also try to have the discussions in English as well, okay?
Teacher,
sorry?
I'm just going to say that Efe Arslan Söyler is going to just reopen the laptop just because it just, I don't know, it has like lag or something. Just going to restart it.
Okay, all right, very good. Now, okay, I'm starting recording. And we can start the broadcast as well. Okay. Hello, good morning now. Today's topic, what we're going to discuss is systems thinking. And this is an important topic because, can you see the screen?
Just checking.
Not it.
Now. 1 second. I'll share the screen with you. Now?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Now, what we are going to see is the following. Okay. Now, everybody sees the screen, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, systems thinking is a way of seeing the world, actually. For example, it is actually a basic difference between, there's a basic difference between seeing the world in the eyes of parts or in the eyes of a whole. In other words, it's a paradigm. A paradigm is a set of assumptions by which we evaluate the world, by which we understand the world. For example, let me ask you one question. Is the world flat?
As they say, no.
Yes, of course the world is flat.
Okay. Is the world round, or was the world flat? Was it believed to be flat at some point in
Yes.
the history?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then what happened? Sorry? Efe? Then what happened? Then it was proven, right?
Can I say something about that?
From one point,
You're free.
we ended up at the same point, right? Is that true?
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Okay. Now my question is, was this a basic assumption for the people to understand the world itself?
Actually, no.
Why not?
Because in those days, going up to the space and maybe shooting some footage is really like impossible.
That's correct. So it was actually, but in those days, when the world was believed to be flat, it was a basic assumption about how they saw the world, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What I mean is that it was a paradigm. A paradigm is a basic set of assumptions to understand the world.
Yeah.
Now, what happened was that the paradigm changed at some point, and the world was started to be believed as round, right?
Hocam paradigm ne demek?
Paradigma demek. It's the framework, it's the set of assumptions with which you understand the world. Okay? For example, going to the moon was impossible at some point, right?
Yes.
But at some point it became possible.
Yes.
And our understanding of the relationship between the Earth and the space has changed. Is that true?
Correct.
Yeah. So it's a paradigm shift. It's the shift of the set of assumptions by which we understand the world. Now, how does this relate to systems thinking? Systems thinking, in other words, there are two basic ways of seeing or understanding things around us. Okay? What are the things around us? People, organizations, ourselves, machines.
Science.
Sorry?
Science. Bilim.
What's that? Science? Okay. There is a basic scientific approach which is called analysis. Analysis, you know that all. And it is based on the idea that in order to understand, for example, a car, in order to fix a car, if there is a problem in a car, what is the method of fixing it? Any ideas? Have you ever been to a car repair shop?
Yeah.
Yes.
What do they do there?
They repair the car.
Yes, but how?
Oh my god.
By
Aman
changing the
Tanrım.
parts maybe that were worn or broken or cut off.
They ask you some questions about the car.
Oh,
They ask you
we're
some
talking
questions about the car. Yes.
first they analyze the car.
Okay.
Then they find the problem. Then they repair the problem.
Okay, but do they treat the car as a whole, or do they put the car in pieces?
In pieces.
Normally,
Yes, this. Yeah.
in parts. So they try to identify which part is the problem, right?
Right.
Yes.
Following me? They take the car and break it into its parts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Normally.
Mhm.
Yes. Then they analyze the individual parts, but as separate from each other. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And then in order to finish the job, what do? They recombine the components, they recombine the parts into the original car, and then they give it back to you. Is that correct?
Correct.
So analyzing method is first you make it parts,
Yes.
and you try to identify which part has the problem.
That's
When you
correct.
identify, you repair it or find a solution. Then
Yes.
you make them together again.
Very good.
Okay.
And then this approach is depends on the idea that when you recombine the parts, you're going to have a functioning system. Okay? When you recombine the individual parts which function okay, then the system will function okay as well. Okay?
Yes.
So this is called analysis, and the idea is called reductionism. Reductionism indirgemecilik demek. So we
Hocam.
take
Ben yeni geldim de.
Kim
Yeni
Kubilay
uyandım.
mısın sen?
Yarkın yer
Aynen.
hocam.
Ha, yardımcı.
Kubilay benim.
Ha,
Ben de yeni geldim.
Tamam. We're going to do this in English, so you please start to follow us.
Evet, bet.
and I will correct you in the attendance sheet. Okay?
Okay.
Very good. Now, what is wrong maybe with this approach? Does anybody have an idea?
Can you rephrase, please?
Yes. Is there a problem with the approach that when we analyze something, we take the whole, break it into parts, we look at the parts in isolation, and then we recombine the parts, and then we say that the system is the sum of its parts?
It takes too much time.
It takes too much time, most of the cases. That's one. But what is not taken into account here? What is not considered here? Do you think? Okay,
By analyzing a problem, you don't solve it.
You don't solve it.
Analyze
You only solve the problem in one of the parts, right? So in other words, the relations between the parts, do we consider them in this approach?
Yes.
How they are interacting, how they affect each other. Do we normally consider the interaction between the parts in this approach? When one part is connected to the other, if we don't look at how it is connected and how it affects one another, how they affect one another, do we have a complete understanding of the system?
We don't, but while we are repairing that problem, we think that, oh, if we do this, the other part may get damaged. So we think solutions only that may not damage the other parts. So
Okay.
I don't think it will be a problem.
Okay, but this is okay. This kind of approach is okay when actually there is not much connectivity between the parts. Because when the problem is very complex, then we might have problems in this way.
Well, if you find a reading method that can have connection with all parts and find a solution, it will be better, even better.
Yes, and here comes the systems thinking idea. Can you follow here? Because can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. And the systems thinking idea is based on the idea of synthesis rather than analysis. Synthèse. Okay? And the idea starts with that the components are only meaningful as part of a whole. You get this?
Yes.
The components of an entity, of an object, of a system are only meaningful because they form a connected whole. So the approach is focused on the relations between the elements, okay, rather than the elements in isolation. How are the two elements related? When I change one element, how is the second element affected?
Doesn't it change as this example?
How is it again?
Doesn't it change by the example you give?
Yes, in the car example, what
Okay.
happens is that if, for example, we identify that the brake is damaged and we fix the brake, but then we put the brake in its original position, but then something else is affected. Okay?
It may be.
Yeah, maybe or may not be. But the systems thinking, the synthesis approach takes into account in the first place that the car parts are all connected to each other. So the problem might be in none of the individual parts, but the way the two parts or the more than two parts are connected. Okay? So the problem may be in the way that the parts are connected, not only in the individual parts themselves. Is this clear?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Very
understand,
good.
but like
Yeah.
when we think the problem as a whole, won't it take may way more longer to find the main problem?
It might be, but you might have a better understanding of the whole system, how it functions. So actually you can diagnose, you can identify the problem itself in a shorter time period, because you have a holistic, you have a view of the system as a whole. Then you look at the connections, the relations between the parts, and then you can identify the solution in a shorter time frame, rather than going and analyzing each and
Hocam takıldınız.
Hocam
Sesiniz
dondunuz.
gelmedi az önce bir şey söylediyseniz.
Şimdi geldi mi?
Yes.
Geldi hocam.
Yeah. There is an important concept here. In the first place, how does this work? The systems thinking work. First of all, we identify the system which has the component in it that we are interested. Okay. For example, the brake in the whole car system. So we identify the system first, and then we gain an understanding of how this system functions. How does this work together? What are the principles that connect the parts together? Okay? And then we gain an understanding how the parts are related to each other and they function as a whole. Only in this way we can approach the problem in a more insightful, anlayışlı, içgörüyle, insightful manner. In other words, what is more important is not the part itself, but the context in which the part functions. Okay? What is the context? Context, çevre, yani içinde bulunduğu ortam, durum. The context in which the part functions. For example, so let's talk about a couple of examples, if you want. What can do you understand? Do you have an understanding of the systems versus analysis, synthesis versus analysis now?
Not at all.
Not at all? Okay, who has an understanding? Can anybody tell me?
What understanding? I missed that part.
I mean, what is the difference between analysis and synthesis I just described? Analysis is, where does it start from?
So in analysis, first we ayırmak nasıl deriz hocam?
We break the whole into
Parts.
Okay.
And we try to find the problem in each parts, but we do not think the relationships or how they work together. So when we find the resolution, we may find a resolution that may damage the other parts or just have bad relationships. So using the analysis part is not very effective. In synthesis, we think the main thing as a whole. We don't break it into parts, so we can see how it functions or the relations between them. So when we are finding a solution, we can think these things, these facts. So when we find the solution is the perfect one.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much, Efe. Thank you. Indeed, this is what I've just told you. And actually, I have a short video that I would like to show you in this respect. It's about 5 minutes. Would you like to watch it?
Well,
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think it's a good idea
Why not?
because of the Wi-Fi. Like the FPS drops to
Ah.
low, so we cannot watch it. We tried in other lessons. and
You
this-
tried in other lessons. Okay. All right. Okay.
So you can give us some time, like 5 minutes, and we can watch individually.
Okay. Let's try. Let me open this one first here. Can you see?
Yes.
Thinking is what we call a paradigm. A dictionary definition of a paradigm would read something like this: a worldview underlying the theories and methodology of a particular scientific subject. Thus, we can understand a paradigm to be the foundation that shapes our way of seeing the world. It is the assumptions and methods out of which we build our theories. Now, there are two fundamentally different paradigms within science. One is called analysis and the other synthesis. Analysis is the traditional method of reasoning taken within modern science, whereby we try to gain an understanding of a system by breaking it down into its constituent elements. On the other hand, synthesis, which is the foundation to systems thinking, works in the reverse direction, trying to gain an understanding of an entity through the context of its relations within a whole that it is part of. But let's start by talking a bit about analysis. Analysis is based upon the premise that our basic unit of interest should be the individual parts of a system. From this follows a process of reasoning called reductionism. Reductionism is the process of breaking down or reducing systems to their constituent parts, and then describing the whole system primarily as simply the sum of these constituent elements. Reductionism is often described in terms of a three-step process that we use for analyzing things. Firstly, we take something and we break it down into its constituent elements. This is deeply intuitive to us when we wish to understand how a car, bird, or business works. The first thing we do is isolate it by taking it into a garage or lab and decompose it into its constituent parts. Secondly, once we have broken down the system into its most elementary components, we analyze these individual components in isolation in order to describe their properties and their functioning in isolation. Lastly, we recombine these components into the original system that can now be described in terms of the properties of its individual elements. The reductionist approach is the fundamental method behind modern science, and by extension, our modern understanding of the world, and it has proven highly successful in many ways, from understanding atoms and DNA to designing the modern corporation and nation state. But as successful as it has been, it also has inherent limitations to it. Because we understand systems by breaking the parts down and isolating them, the reductionist paradigm systematically and inherently depromotes the relationships between these components. Thus, within this paradigm of reductionism, the whole system is implicitly thought to be nothing more than the sum of its parts. Thus, analysis works well when there is a low level of interconnectivity and interdependencies within the system we are modeling. Although this may be true for some systems, it is certainly not always the case. Many of the systems we are interested in describing have a high level of interconnectivity and interdependency, examples being ecosystems, computer networks, and many types of social systems. These systems, in contrary, are primarily defined by the relations within the system, and not the static properties of their elements. We can and often do continue to use analysis to try to describe them, but the reductionist approach
Durdu.
to the components, and this is where synthesis and systems thinking comes in.
Takip edebiliyor musunuz çocuklar?
Bir yerde takıldı.
2-3
Yes.
saniye dondu.
Şimdi devam edelim.
Video takılmadı. Sizin bağlantınız komple gitti.
Ne gitti çocuklar?
Herkes video takıldı sandı galiba. Ama ben sizin kameranıza baktım ve sizin kameranız da donmuştu. Sizin bağlantınız bu siteye bağlantınız
Gitti mi? Şimdi ekranda ne görüyorsunuz?
System thinking videosu.
Videosunu görüyorsunuz. Çok az kaldı. Biraz devam edelim.
5 saniye geri alsanız iyi olur. Combination of components or elements to form a connected whole. It is a process of reasoning that describes an entity through the context of its relations and functioning within the whole system that it is a part of. Systems thinking is the process of reasoning called synthesis, and it is also referred to as being what is called holistic, meaning that it is characterized by the belief that the parts of something are intimately interconnected and explicable only by reference to the whole. Thus, synthesis focuses on the relations between the elements, that is to say, the way those elements are put together or arranged into a functioning entirety. And like with analysis, we can also identify a few key stages in this process of reasoning. The first step in the process is to identify the system that our object of interest is a part of. Examples of this might be a bird being part of a broader ecosystem or a person being part of a greater culture. Next, we try to gain a broad outline of how this whole system functions. So, for example, a hard drive is part of a computer, and to properly understand it, we need to have some understanding of the whole computer. Lastly, we try to understand how the parts are interconnected and arranged to function as an entirety. By completing this process, we can identify the relations within which our entity is embedded, its place and function within the whole, and within systems thinking, this context is considered the primary frame of reference for describing something.
Evet çocuklar. Takip edebildiniz mi birazcık da olsa?
Evet.
Güzel. Edemeyen var mı? Bir bakalım ne durumdayız şu anda. Okay. Şimdi şunu soracağım size. Mesela bir örnek if you want to do if you want to give an example, how are you going to approach an individual person in terms of systems thinking?
Analysis. Hocam yine gittiniz.
You froze again.
Hello, can you hear me?
You're
Yeah,
back.
now we can hear you.
Okay, my question is, how are you going to approach a person, the understanding of an individual, a person, yourself, your friend, from a systems perspective, do you think?
I think we need to think against synthesis.
Yeah.
Yes, how can we? For example, let's give an example. Efe versus Deniz Gökgöz. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hocam VS mi atacağız, ne yapacağız?
How does Efe understand Deniz? What is Efe? What does Efe need to consider in terms of systems thinking in order to understand Deniz as an individual?
First, I need to think his relationships with other people, like his family, his friends. Then I need to think his hobbies, such as sports. I know that he likes playing basketball, so I need to think these two. So while finding a solution, I need to think the fact that his hobbies, his relationship with his hobbies,
About
his
family.
friends, his family.
Yeah. What is the context in which you should understand Deniz's family, for example? What is the greater context? What do we look at when we understand when we try to understand what kind of a family are we talking about? Do you think? From a systems perspective. So what is even the bigger context that the family is in?
Bilemedim hocam.
Yani şunu söyle. What I mean is, for example, the geography where they come from, does it affect?
Of course.
Hı, tabii.
Or the socioeconomic conditions, for example, does it affect?
Yes.
Yeah. Or the culture that they grew up in, does it affect?
For sure.
To understand the family. So it's the greater context that the family is in relation with the way the family interacts with the original geography where they come from, the new geography where they live in, and the culture that they brought, that they started to acquire, that they start to experience here, etc. So the whole context is actually what determines what kind of a family this is, right? And this is true for every other person's family, actually. So we look at the greater context, the social system that the family lives under. Is this clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. For example, when you want to understand an organization, from a systems perspective, what do you look at? For example, when you want to analyze think, for example, what kind of like from a systems perspective, what do you look at normally?
Their point of view for the problems.
That's one. Yes.
We need to think everyone's job, like Zeynep there is the CEO, the teachers and the students and their relationships
With each other. That's correct. Yes. And what else though? The school as a whole, the organization as a whole, does it operate in a vacuum? Vacuum?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
What's a vacuum? What's vacuum? Boşluk. Does it operate? Does the school operate in a space, or does it operate in a operate? Does it operate where? What is the context in which our schools operate?
No idea.
Yani, what I mean is that there is a state, right, that regulates the education through
Yes.
the Milli Eğitim Bakanlığı, through the Ministry of Education.
Hoca gitti.
And you're gone again.
Not correct, is governed by, is administered, is regulated by this ministry. So we are not free to do everything that we want, because there is a regulation. So the general context is the policies around education in the country, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So that's what I meant by the context. But you're all right that in order to understand the organization also, we need to consider it as an internal system, the relations between the teachers, the management, and the students and the parents, etc. as well. Very good. I think we are approaching to the end of the class. What we are going to do next time is to continue with this discussion, but in a slightly different angle, and that is going to be how we view processes as in terms of systems thinking. Process, what does process mean?
Aşama.
Süreç, very good. Süreç. How do we see the processes in terms of systems thinking? So what I want you to do until next class, to observe around you and find a simple process and think of how you can make that process better.
Okay.
Can you please repeat it?
Can you repeat?
Yeah.
Observe around your home, etc., the TV, etc., whatever you want. But define, for example, coffee making is a process, right?
Right.
Tea making or cooking is a process, or cleaning the house is a process, etc. So find me a process and think of it in system terms, and describe me a way that you can improve this process.
Okay.
All right? So this is going to be next time.
Could you open the slide? I had to write.
Which slide? Yeah, sure. 1 second.
Efe, you know that the teacher sent us the files.
Ha.
Yeah. What
Gönderdiyse tamam.
yeah, I did already. I sent you the file.